In Mass Effect Andromeda's multiplayer, you are part of an Apex team, the best of the best the Nexus has to offer. While not a regular group of soldiers, they are nonetheless talented individuals that take on the most dangerous and important missions in this new galaxy. In this series, we are going to take a look at the various class builds for the various characters in the game's multiplayer. So with that in mind, I'm Darcblade, and let's take a look at the next Mass Effect Andromeda multiplayer character, the human Vanguard. As always, remember that these builds are aimed at the harder difficulties in the game, and they are made with rank 10 level 20 characters. However, there will be suggestions for lower ranked characters as long as they're level 20 later on in the video. The human Vanguard bears many similarities to the Mass Effect 3 multiplayer's Vanguard, but thanks to Andromeda's mechanics, is slightly different, and in my opinion a lot stronger than it was in the previous game. However, the basics of the Vanguard still remain. It's a very shock and awe character, able to charge point blank at enemies and deal large amounts of biotic damage. There are also a few ways to spec the human Vanguard. One can focus solely on power damage, trying to deal as much damage as you can with Charge, Nova and Shockwave. Another one is weapon based. And the final one, and by far at the moment the most viable one, is the melee based build. The melee build though does take advantage of both weapon and power damage at certain points, but as a whole it is focusing on melee. So with that in mind, I start by maxing out Charge, going up to rank 6, putting points into Bastion over Shock Trooper. Whilst Shock Trooper gives you a huge cooldown reduction on the charge ability, it doesn't quite make it viable enough that you'll be able to charge quick enough for you to charge again and not take damage. With that in mind, Bastion became the better option as it restores an extra 50% of your shields, making for a grand total of 100% shields restored, but it also increases the damage of charge and grants you 75 damage resistance. Next, with rank 5, I put points into weapons and melee over power synergy. This is because, like I said, I will be focusing on melee damage, and weapons and melee both increase your weapon damage and, more importantly, your melee damage. Power synergy is also a good option, especially if you're going for a power focused Vanguard build. Next, with rank 4, I put points into radius over damage and force. Both of these are viable, however, because charge can be used to stagger enemies, I go for radius, thus I can stagger more opponents in front of me as long as they're close together, well, within 3.5 meters of one another. This just helps out with survivability, as I will be mainly using charge as a survival tool and not a damage dealing tool. Next, with Nova, I maxed this out, going up to rank 6, putting points into Seismic Nova over Shield Powered. Now this is one of the main differences from Mass Effect 3's multiplayer. Before, Nova took away your shields, just as the Shield Powered evolution does. This can leave you very vulnerable, especially if you haven't got a quick enough cooldown to charge again. With that in mind, I put points into Seismic Nova instead, which adds extra damage and force to the Nova, but also primes enemies who are affected by the Nova for a biotic combo. I'm sure there is a build that can still utilize shield powered, but at the moment it is not as viable as the melee build, it feels. Next, I put points into rank 5, putting points into anti-armor over anti-shield. This is simply because there are more opponents that actually have armor. And finally, with rank 4, I put points into damage and force over radius. Again, this is a personal preference, although I am primarily using my Nova as a damage and staggering tool for when there are multiple foes around me. Next, with Shockwave, I only put 1 point into this ability, solely to use it as a detonator for when charge is on cooldown. If I were to put maximum points into this though, I would probably go up to rank 6, putting points into lifting Shockwave over anti-armor, just so it becomes another biotic combo primer. Then I'd put points into probably recharge speed over reach. This is because the Vanguard normally needs to get close to their opponents, and recharge speed will allow you to use it more often. And then finally, I would probably put points into damage radius, so I can potentially prime more opponents. As with the passives, with Apex training, I go up to rank 6, putting points into power specialist, ammo and targeting, and power damage. These are all really down to personal preference. However, in rank 6 power specialist, I took this for the quicker power recharge speed. After that, it's a case of whether you want your power damage increased or weapon damage. Finally, with barrier, max out this, focusing solely on melee attacks. So first, with rank 6, I've put points into saving barrier over active barrier. Active barrier is a great evolution and works incredibly well if you're standing with your team in a hunkered down position. But as the Vanguard is normally moving around the map and there are rarely allies close to him, Saving Barrier can be a lifesaver for this class. Next, I put points into rank 5, taking Barrier Drain over Biotic Alacrity. Biotic Drain is one of the key evolutions for this melee build, as every time you melee, you also restore your shields. It also increases your melee damage. And finally, with rank 4, I put points into Unyielding Barrier over Recuperative Barrier. This is simply to max out the shields a little bit more. As for weaponry, you'll probably be spending most of your time up close and personal with opponents. With that in mind, taking a close range weapon such as a submachine gun or shotgun can be optimal. And as for gear slots, take something to either increase your melee damage, biotic damage or shields. Anyway, on to the heart of the episode to talk about the abilities the human Vanguard has at their disposal. First is Charge, or formerly known as Biotic Charge. Once used, this ability will alter the biotic user's mass, launching the user at their highlighted target, after which they will slam into the opponent, not only dealing biotic damage to the opponent, but also restoring the user's shields. If spec'd right as well, this can restore all of your shields and not just 50%, 50% being the default if you don't have points in Bastion. Biotic Charge is also an ability that can detonate combos, not just your own, but also your teammates. Biotic Charge also comes in useful for traversing the map quickly, as it allows you to attack opponents on the other side of the map almost instantly. However, be wary, because if you charge into a dangerous situation, there's a chance that you might go down, and especially be wary of charging into foes who have insta-kills, such as the Ket Ascendants, Fiends, and the Outlaw Hydra. Next, moving on to the second ability, Nova. Once used, the Vanguard will channel energy into a point-blank, high-damaging explosion around them. This deals fairly substantial damage to all opponents caught in the default 4-meter radius. However, the Vanguard will do a short animation before the Nova is actually cast. Nova can also be used mid-air, allowing the Vanguard to drop down to unsuspecting foes beneath them. If you spec Nova to be a primer by putting points into Seismic Nova, then this can come in handy, because after using Nova you can follow up with another Biotic Charge, or Shockwave even, to detonate the Biotic combo. As I mentioned when talking about my spec, be wary if you are using shield powered, because this can leave you vulnerable when you use Nova. However, taking shield power will mean that you can use Nova as long as you have any shields, as it removes any cooldown effect on the ability. And lastly, with the actual abilities, moving on to Shockwave. This will cause the Vanguard to hurl a line of explosions that proceeds in front of them. This will damage any opponent that it hits, as well as knock back or even activate biotic combos. This also has a unique benefit, as it will go through solid objects and walls even. So this means that if you prime a target and they take cover behind a wall, then you can still activate the combo by using Shockwave. The three abilities for the Vanguard do work quite well with one another. For example, you could charge Nova, and then if the target is primed, thanks to Nova being a Seismic Nova, means you can follow up with Shockwave to activate the detonation quite quickly. As for the passives, as I already mentioned with Apex training, it's a choice between weapon damage or power damage. Personally, like I said, I prefer power damage to increase Nova, Shockwave and Charge's damage capabilities. And finally, with Barrier, you need to focus on going for melee attacks. With Draining Barrier, if you charge single targets, then you charge and then can simply melee them to death, even with recent changes to the melee system. Thanks to Draining Barrier, the Vanguard can almost tank their way through most situations. Just remember that as you're using melee, if it's not enough and charge comes off cooldown, charge again to instantly get all of your barriers back. As I already mentioned, with weapons, take something that's good at close range, just in case your powers are on cooldown or it's unsafe to melee an opponent. The human Vanguard comes with average health and shields. However, despite this, thanks to Charge when spec'd as Bastion and Barrier spec'd as Barrier Drain, means that he can take a lot of punishment before going down. His dodge is a simple human dodge utilising the thrusters on their suits, and their melee attacks are a biotic punch, a punch that is powered thanks to their biotic capabilities. I would also advise taking melee boosters, especially if you're taking on the harder difficulties in the game. If you haven't got a rank 10 Vanguard, and that's not as many points to spend, I would still focus on maxing out Charge, going all the way up to Bastion. Afterwards, it's probably wise to go all the way up to rank 5 in the Barrier tree, taking Barrier Drain. After which, it's a case of putting points in where you feel you need them. Personally, I would probably start putting points into Apex training, or even maxing out Barrier, taking Saving Barrier. Overall, the human Vanguard is a very powerful class, able to take a lot of damage, but not only that, they can dish out a lot of damage. However, they have to be in close proximity to be at their best. whilst on the lower difficulties, Vanguards will normally dominate most matches, as there are very few enemies on the field, and they can easily get to point A to point B before their teammates can. However, this becomes increasingly difficult, especially on the harder difficulties in the game. You also risk putting yourself in needless danger, so be careful about where you charge to. I personally found the Vanguard one of the easiest classes to play in the game, thanks to their survivability, even going so much as you can solo most difficulties with this class with the right gear. However, the Vanguard can come across a few issues. For example, it doesn't perform too well when taking hold the point objectives, as they normally lack the long range capabilities that other classes do. And if you were to charge, then you would be ignoring the objective altogether. The Vanguards work well with teams that move and roam together. However, there can be conflict and tension when a Vanguard plays with a hunkered down team, as the Vanguard can be at a great distance away from his team at times, but at the same time putting him at risk, as the Vanguard won't have their teammates' support. For example, if the Vanguard should go down, then it's unlikely that his allies will make it there in time for him to be revived. If you are a Vanguard and you find yourself playing with a hunkered down team, maybe consider protecting their flanks, or when they're getting attacked by melee focused opponents. Anyway, I hope this video helps, and until next time, I've been Darcblade, bringing you a Mass Effect Andromeda Multiplayer class guide to the human Vanguard. Hope you enjoyed the video, thanks for watching, subscribe and like for more.